well, people will define how your day goes, either badly or good or so sorry. I slept 4 hours because I think I was concerned about this.
Oh
So
no! That's you see, that's exactly what we should cut in as part of our intro because
all the
we're not
bloopers,
that
right?
serious. Yeah.
Hi everyone, this is Ship Now, Cry Later. We have a podcast for designers where we talk about resilience in designers and teams. We won't be sharing the latest Figma or AI tips, but we'll share stories on how we deal with change and navigate complex environments. Our first episode is Roots Before Branches, and basically, what makes a designer or a team actually stable when everything shifts. We'll be looking at, core values, craft identity, and what's the difference between flexibility and formlessness. What do you hold on to when the role description changes again and again?
Google figured this out in 2012. Harvard had the research even before that. The data has been sitting here over a decade. Clear as anything, teams that feel safe do better work. They're more productive, more creative, more innovative, and they stay longer. Psychological safety isn't a soft concept, it's a performance variable and it moves revenue numbers. And it was never really about feelings, it was always about the output. And here we are in 2026 in an industry that moves faster than ever before, absorbing more pressure than ever before, with an AI writing job descriptions in real time, with design teams getting smaller, being asked to do more, of course, and somehow we've gone backwards. The org charts got more complicated and the reorgs got more frequent. The environments got really harsh and the conversation about it actually just what it takes to do good work inside all of it almost completely absent. It's not an accident and it's costing teams and the people in them more than anyone is officially admitting. We started this podcast because we've both lived on the wrong side of that gap and we know what it costs. And we know that the answer was never a better framework, a new tool, or another sprint retrospective. The answer is the environment. And it's always been the environment. This is not a podcast about fixing design or talking about how fast we can deliver a prototype. It's about fixing the conditions that let designers and the people who lead them actually do their best work, especially when the industry shifts.
And, unfortunately, even us, we do not have all the answers. So, besides making a podcast, our decision was to also create this as a research project. So we want to explore how industry professionals around the world they are building positively resilient teams and why that matters like today more than ever. We will be inviting guests as we ramp up in the future. This first episode is going to be only us, and we're going to be giving you all of us unfiltered, vulnerable. But you're not going to have to listen to hours of rambling because we have invited some of our most favorite industry people to give us a preview of what resilience means to them. And going forward, we want to hear from you. We'll be enabling contributions via WhatsApp and our socials. And we're very interested in hearing your stories for the upcoming episodes. So, how did we get here? And it's interesting, right? We move in design and we come and we start working as designers, and we think, okay, the work is basically deliver the work, get feedback, iterate. But then you realize that the more you work on it, the more this is about people, and people will define how well or how badly your days will go and how successful you are. I guess the most important thing is how well you'll be able to create things, or how successful you'll be in actually doing your job, you know?
Yeah. And it's not to say that, engineering does not, like, engineering jobs are not being defined by people around them every day, or finance jobs are not being defined by people every day. It's, I think what we mean, both of us, is a little bit different. It's like engineering has boundaries, and we always knew that, it's part of culture already for years and years, that, if you ask an engineer something to be changed during the sprint, you're gonna get cut, right? Unfortunately, designers don't have these boundaries. Finance has boundaries, commercial has boundaries, they have their goals. It's pretty standardized in a way. I do believe, and I kind of feel like design genuinely does not have those boundaries. And we have moved our own boundaries. And the industry has defined what we should be doing, what we should not be doing. So one year, you're doing wireframes, and then next year you're on C-suite presentations, and you're reorganizing the organization in design and product. It's We've been so constantly redefining who we are and what we do, that this job in particular just needs some kind of like stable psychological steadiness to just be okay with the job every day, because it changes all the time. And I don't think anybody trains you for that shift, that constant shift. um and honestly, I have myself advised juniors to, try everything, and now I'm starting to get really worried how those people are doing.
But it's true, like nobody ever trains you for that. You don't, they teach all the double diamond and all these other processes and design sprints, but I think nobody changes how adaptable designers have to be. And if you look at the history of web design, like we changed job titles so many times. Like when I started out, and that was only 10 years ago, it was like UX, UI, now product design. But before that, you had the information architects or the interaction designers. So in general, I think we're already quite resilient, but we still are not getting that place or that kind of environment at work. And I think it's tricky also because there's a lot of contradiction, right? So we're trying to empathize deeply with our users, even with our stakeholders and all of that. And then we're also trying to follow the process. So you need to do your research, you need to validate, you need to iterate. But then when you come and you go work for like a big corporation, you have to be flexible because those things they might not work, and not all projects will need all of that either, right? That's kind of up to your judgment.
Like, you mean like
And
all the process that we've been taught, right? From top to bottom.
yeah, yeah. I mean, how many times we saw people saying to us too, right? Like, oh, this is not right research, or this is not how you do research. It's like, yeah, but that project specifically didn't request that level of research. And I'm guilty of that too. Hey, because it takes you a while to understand that and to get that experience to know what's important and what's not. I think the interesting part is that, we're very empathetic with others, but then we're not really with ourselves, and we feel like we absorb everyone's problems. And, you say that too, Egle, and I said that at some points. Now I kind of get annoyed by saying that we're the glue of companies, because if we're the glue, we should be paid as the glue, and we're definitely not paid as the glue. But it's true, we observe everyone's problems and we lose a little bit of our identity as a designer in our roles, because we end up doing a bit of product work, and now with AI, becoming AI engineers. So it's very easy to blend.
Yeah. um I think you're right. I mean, it's so easy for us in this kind of industry, in the UX industry, because we're literally in the middle of everybody. So we see everybody's issues and we see everybody's inefficiencies. Yet our own work is subjective. right? It's
Yeah.
always up for interpretation. How do we understand this piece of research? How do we understand this piece of data? How do we, do this user experience? And when everything is fine, our work is kind of invisible, and like maybe that's how it should be, right? Because there is always rhetoric about how the best user experience is invisible, and
Yeah,
I
yeah.
believe
And
to
even
that,
design in general, like
yeah,
industrial design, the best one is invisible.
exactly. And I believe in that too, but like unlike engineers or commercial people, there's no specific defined number of you did it, like that was a success. You always have to find that number yourself. You have to dig through it, and you have to be capable to look through everything around you to find it, to prove your own success. Nobody is going to give it to you. And that is where the interpretation becomes a really hard part of the job. And especially it's even harder when you have small teams or under resourced teams, or you have one bad leader that can destabilize absolutely everything in that team, right? So we're not here to talk about Figma, huh?
Yep. And we're not going to tell you the latest AI, which by the time we're recording is Claude design. But by the time this episode goes out, it could be, who knows, right?
It could be anything.
Yeah, Grok design.
Oh my God, no. Yeah, we're here to talk about people skills. We're here to talk about self-awareness. We're here to talk about the real work and these imperfect systems that we're in. And that's the whole thing. That's the whole point.
Now you heard us talk a little bit and you're like, okay, who are these people, right? So let us introduce ourselves and give you our background. So we have both been in high stress environments and essentially we turned to each other to get that resilience, and we helped each other in times where we needed perspective. Egle was my manager, but we developed a friendship as well, and I feel like we really were there for each other when we needed. So I'm Anna. I'm a lead designer and design manager, and I spent most of my time working in complex, chaotic problem spaces. A lot of business processes turn into software, which is a very weird space, and it's hard to understand, hard to simplify, I suppose, because people don't really necessarily agree with each other. So my main goal is always to help teams to find the clarity to move forward with whatever design work I can provide. And essentially, I'm very interested in these times more than ever in fostering critical thinking in my work and the designers I support. And I think resilience is actually key for having us that critical thinking, um, especially now that the world is getting faster and noisier and full of AI slop. Critical thinking and resilience are going to be two allies for us to thrive in these new ways of working.
I'm Egle. I'm a fractional UX leader and consultant. And well, in a short manner and a blunt manner, I build teams, I fix structures, and I do the strategic work that makes sure you're building the right thing before AI ships the wrong one fast.
All right. So now that you know who we are, let's give you a little bit more context of this episode. This episode is really introducing our main topic throughout all of the episodes. So we're going to try to discuss and find answers to the question, what makes a designer or team actually stable when everything shifts? And we're going to be exploring how resilient UX teams are built just through our past stories, studies that we've seen, and our experiences, and learning how that comes together.
If I could give one advice to my younger self about this job, that would be don't stick to your job title. Learn beyond that. Learn about system thinking, strategy, business, team dynamics. Learn about how to communicate the value of your work, stakeholder management. Knowledge is the key. Go beyond that title. That's the key. That's the best advice I could give myself.
What's the thing that I think is essential to survival in the job today? Um, well, I would probably try to reframe that question a bit. Um, I don't think we should try to survive in one job because there's no such thing as that one safe job anymore. And, when I was early in my career, that was my intention to try to be the best I could be in that one job by pleasing people and learning every skill that I could think of and try to climb that ladder. But what we're seeing now is that that ladder is leaning against a moving wall on a wobbly ground. And I think trying to be better at climbing a ladder in those circumstances can be a bit of a fruitless mission. So rather than trying to spend all your time and resources and energy trying to be um, good at sailing that one ship, I think we need to be better at building multiple boats just in case if that one ship sinks. And I think the possibility of that one ship sinking is going to be greater and greater. And I think we're seeing that with um, what's happening with the industry. So I think that the biggest skill that we can learn as designers is not just to design, but to be in this constant loop of learning, building, and selling. And by that, what I mean is, we need to be open to learning new skills and not learning forever, but learning a tiny bit and using that tiny little learning to then building something new, even if it's something tiny, and then selling that thing that we've built.
So I think design and resilience are um, kind of go hand in hand. They're like all partners, they know each other very well. Perhaps we not always had a word for it before, or definitely didn't have a word for things like psychological safety in teams and etc. But I feel like we've always been resilient because, if you think about web design, which is where we are, we have graphic design, industrial designers. There's always been a constant evolution since the beginning of everything. Um, and, we were adapting. We adapted to new ways of working. I think in graphic design, was the major jump from when everything was done in paper to then start using computers, like a crazy revolution. For us, I guess we're having this equivalent moving from Figma to AI. And, I think a lot of designers are shown that resilience and we learn. We're definitely not learning that from school, we're learning from working. And I feel like, at least in my case, this is coming from experience as well. But I always think about the fact that maybe this is also like a personality trait, like some people, they recover quicker when they face with challenges. And, for me, I feel like I am a resilient person, but then I also maybe I forget that. Which is what I think. Like, is it something that you think it comes with you? Is it like a soft skill, or do you think you can learn it? What do you think?
This is a huge question. I'm pretty sure there's so many more better positioned people and psychologists who could actually answer this in a theoretical, you know, academical way, but I just don't believe that resilience is a skill. And I say that from the experience, from years of experience in leadership and looking at how teams operate and how companies operate. Um, and obviously from my own personal experience, how I, went through things before I even knew the terminology for it. So I don't really tend to believe that it's a skill or a personality trait. I don't think you're born with resilience. I look at it more like as a muscle. Um, I look at it more as something you foster and you grow. in an appropriate environment. The thing is that we can only grow that resilience in appropriate environments, in adequate environments, because I think too much adversity in our day to day will end up being negative more than positive
Yeah.
for us to actually grow that thick skin. Like, for example, imagine you are somewhere between junior and medium designer, and you have just come back from a meeting with engineering and product management, and maybe you said something that maybe didn't land well, and that created an awkward situation, and suddenly you feel like, oh my god, maybe they will start looking at me differently, so you start worrying. What if you decide to take that worry to your manager, and your manager reacts to it in an adverse way? Let's say that manager starts to spiral. Would that make you feel safe? Would you still think about coming back to the manager again with another issue, later on? Probably not. You're probably not going to feel too safe if the manager spirals with you.
Yeah.
And now think about the opposite way. Imagine that you are the same designer, you brought the same issue to the manager, who actually, takes it as it is, and maybe even reacts to it in a playful manner. It doesn't make it a big deal. You will feel much safer, and you will absolutely feel good enough to bring other issues, maybe even bigger issues later on, to that manager. And I'm pretty sure if you had to choose from between the two, you would choose the second.
Yeah, I think that's such a good example as well, because I feel like sometimes when we're talking about psychological safety, maybe there's this misconception that, oh, we have to be in an environment when everyone is very lovey-dovey and you're like, oh, Egle, you're the best. And and it's not necessarily about being supportive. Obviously, being nice is nice, but I think this is such a good example that having a manager or a colleague that helps you de-escalate something that could go into a spiral, it will help you so much, especially at work, because things are usually temporary, right? So that happened, and if you make that a big deal, that's just going to grow it, and it's not going to take you anywhere. So I think that's such a good, a really good example and a really good story to illustrate that. And it's so so yeah, I think, and I think that's the key, right? So environment is definitely what will fuel your state of mind, and we know that work is definitely not always like something where people are chilled and they're like without ego, and they're just like, hey, if we don't do this, it's fine. If we don't ship it, it's all good.
Most of the time it's not.
Right? Hence the name of the podcast, Ship Now, Cry Later, which is
Yeah.
what I do a lot of the times. So yeah, and I think it's hard for us as designers too, because we're always trained to look at the details, right? So we're encouraged to have this attention to detail and like perception of people, to the point that can be counterproductive, because if you're like thinking too much about it, then that's just going to take you to this whole place where you're going to go into a rabbit hole, and you're going to spiral for nothing really. So yeah, I think it's important to have that. It could be your manager, it could be a colleague, just having that person to de-escalate. But one thing I also want to say is that I think, and this is related to that psychological safety concept. I feel like because we work in creative industries, some conflict is part of our work. And this is where I think there's a bit of misconception about, you need to be able to handle that critique well, and to be able to have those constructive feedback sessions, always being respectful. Like, nobody deserves to be disrespected. That shouldn't be a thing. But you have to have that conflict, and that's usually how like the best solutions come about, or best designs, or all of that.
You're right. And conflict at work is necessary. It's just that we have to, I think, find a way how to do conflict like adults, I think. I'm
Yeah.
probably going to get hate for such terminology, right? But it's, you know, the more I look at, the industry shifting, the more I start to talk with, medium, junior, and kind of like medium to senior designers, and even leaders. There is this rhetoric where designers are being, perceived as emotional,
Hmm.
right? And it's something of a question mark for me, like you know how are we perceived to be emotional? And I really want to kind of dig into this further on, but I want to tell you a story, of how, earlier in my career I didn't want to seem emotional and I didn't want to seem weak. So I mistook
Your
kind of this.
Eastern European stoic
Oh yeah,
personality, right?
of course, of course. I mean, working in Germany in a large corporate environment, and I had a unique situation as well because, I had my role, expanded, like hugely expanded from one day to the other. And in this role, I was, so to say, I was burning the midnight oil, you know, and I did not want to seem weak. I mistook that kind of temporary grit for resilience. Um, but I didn't know that behavior is just completely unsustainable. So why am I saying that? Because as soon as that chapter ended, as soon as I decided to leave that job, I completely broke down. I completely broke down. eh, in It just felt like my entire psyche and my body just broke down because I just wasn't performing for anybody anymore. I was just
Yeah.
me. I had, a couple of weeks between this job and the new job. And believe me, I did not learn my lessons at that point, but those 2 weeks of a gap were not something where I was, relaxing. No, I was breaking down, and crying and, reacting to it as if I don't have anybody to perform to anymore. So, look, that role was expanded from designer to product manager and go to market manager and, tech, manager, and making sure that, the product that we're building is, you know delivered, and delivered in value, and delivered, with appropriate amount of marketing materials inside of the product and outside of the product. I learned so much, but I was not ready for it mentally. The
Hmm.
job, um, was very demanding, and I was encouraged in a way to take this role because if anybody could do it, it was me. So I took it for granted. And for me, that meant, okay, well, you know what? I'll take it. And I will never show that that job is hard.
No.
I didn't want to show that I was struggling. I didn't want to show that I don't know how to do these things. My mentality was, I will figure it out. And I will not show that staying at 11, from 8 to 11 o'clock in the evening, uh, you know, um, planning the work features for the next quarter is sucking my soul out, and I have no idea how to do these features, and I have no idea how my architects work. I just was performing strength and actually was not asking for help. And that, I think, took me down at the end of that job. The lesson here is not about, you know, me. The lesson here is not about me. When we talk about conflict at work, generally speaking, we need to talk about being able to be vulnerable enough to say,
Yeah.
I don't know, how can we do it better? How can we do it smoother? Because that job is not about you. Your output is not you. And
Yeah.
that, I think, is the big difference of how I approach work now versus when I was a little bit more junior.
That's such a vulnerable story, right? And I think I could see it, like you were being trusted with more work, and your head, you're probably thinking, hey, I'm doing really well at work, right? Like I'm nailing this. But you, at the time, couldn't figure out, and you probably didn't have anyone that look out for you at work that tell you, wait, you need to kind of manage this in a certain way, or you need to take it easy in a way, right? And I think a lot of us do that as well, right? We kind of put our value into the work that we do, which should never be the case, because then you can you can have breakdowns, like. And when I made my move to design 10 years ago, and I think those are the things that when they were teaching us, they taught us, like, to detach ourselves a little bit about from our work, because our work is a lot, the work of designers is very, the response will be very emotional, so people have emotional reactions to the stuff that you do. So you need to be able to handle that well. But I think what you were describing is more what tends to happen to a lot of designers too, right? Where you're in a company and you don't have enough people to do certain jobs, and you start filling those gaps. And because we have empathy, and we understand a lot of different things, you kind of are very suited for that. um, but yeah, I think it's very easy to mistake that, you said, to mistake grit for resilience. And I think in my first years, as a designer, I also felt that way. I felt this immense pressure that I needed to show that I could do UX, and the way it translated wasn't very helpful. Like, well, first I will have my breakdowns. At the time we're working in office, so I'll go to the toilet to cry, and then later when we're at home, it's
Oh,
like, oh, at
that
least I can
time.
cry here.
Before home office.
Yeah. um and and that was tough. Like I will endure, but then I will have a lot of break points in my project as well. And yeah, I think it's difficult to separate that, and you feel like you're proving yourself, and you forget that, okay, it's fine, like you don't need to know everything, and I think at the time you're not conscious of that. And yeah, I definitely had moments like that in my career, and I felt very alone, and that led me to be very frustrated and to break down. So I was fortunate to have good managers and good people, and I think I've been always good to, like, make friends at work, which is stupid. Like, we used to run this survey in our teams about having a best friend at work, and we used to think that that's a funny thing to ask people. But it pains me to say that, but it is true. Like, you don't need a best friend, but you do need friends at work.
Yeah, oh yeah. We always thought that it's a stupid question to ask, but the irony is that it's actually one of the most important questions to ask.
I know, but it's like, I guess we were also in that corporate setting, so, but yeah, it's
Yeah.
weird. But I'm also interested to kind of throw back this question a little bit. So we're talking about, you didn't feel like you could ask for help, and in the past I felt that way too. But
Mhm.
what about when you do ask for help and you don't get that? You have, maybe your team is not set up in a way that will help you, your manager, not good enough to help you.
That's a loaded question. I think it's very hard to answer because you have to be able to understand the situation that you're in, in any job. And you will have to, swim through the sea of people and the sea of structures. It's just that the one of the hardest lessons that I've learned, especially in leadership, is that organizations, whether enterprise or startups, are not collaborative by default. They're political. Everybody wants to save their job, and now, especially when the industry is going this way, everybody wants to feel safer. Everybody feels the pressure. Everybody feels the rug slipping under their feet to some extent. So think about it. Like, you don't just by default have random people put together in a group and be told to work together and be you know 100% from 0 to 100% collaborative and everybody's like super nice. No, you have to like get to know each other. You have to understand each other. You have to kind of like start getting in in each other's heads a little bit. Like, how do you think about this? How do I think about this? How do we get together in a way that is productive? And that
No.
is not in the DNA of companies. We do not do this by default, and that's the hard part. Because we see these structures, these rigid structures and organizational charts in many companies, whether it's a startup or an enterprise. It's just a front face. Like, how many companies have we already gone through in our experience? And I'm pretty sure a lot of designers across companies and countries could tell us the same thing. Underneath, things are always shifting, always. That structure that you see on the org chart, it's probably not going to be exactly how it's pictured. And this is where it's extremely important to actually find your allies through this, sea of people, per se, to be able to understand what might work for your team or what might not.
This is something that always fascinates me about organizational design, right? Because when you're younger, you have this maybe more romantic view of like companies and how, they're going to put a team together. It's going to be well balanced between introverts and extroverts and people like this and people like that, finding the right mix, which I think in some companies they do take that seriously. But the majority of the time, it's just about, hiring the person that can do that job and that is somewhat sociable, right? This is something that I always heard, and I also felt like you want to hire somebody that you can work with, and that just translates into someone that is actual has some sort of social skills and they understand how to talk to people and all of that. So we do that, but in a very casual way. It's not a very formal way. and and I think this is where, yeah, it's definitely frustrating because you would expect organizations to be more well structured and actually setting you up to do your best work, but that's definitely not the way it's set up.
Yeah. um Look, the another problem is that the structure does not always mean like that stability that whatever structure that might be. And I'm not talking about the org charts, right? I'm talking about the people that are around us, generally speaking. So people leave, leaders move on, allies move on, but how do we get to those points where we have those allies? This is where we come to like this, also a very much used terminology of like influence without power. Because again, UXers are in the middle of the organization. And that is why I refer to it as glue, very romantically. And I think this is one of the key kind of recommendations I give to everybody who I talk to, from medium to senior to leadership, is where we might want to start plugging in those gaps in some shape or form in, outside of UX, because we need to
Yeah.
be able to know what engineering is doing. We need to be able to know what the business problems are. How does it affect us financially? We need to understand where the clients are. We need to understand how commercial is feeling about it. That's where we start to find stability in people around us without relying on that org structure. Because I will tell you a quick story again, where one time in a big company, our VP of product was leaving, and he announced his, leaving while I was running a design team, and those designers were really attached to him because he was a huge ally. He was our VP of product. He knew what we were doing. He was championing us. And honestly, I did not see this coming because I worked with a guy before. For me, it was kind of like, he's moving on, but it's not going to be over, with our professional relationship. I'm going to see him again. Maybe we'll get to work again. But for them, it was a completely different reaction. When he announced his, leaving, only then I realized how terrible this is. How, the panic that ensued in the voices and the faces of my team was terrifying because in their minds it was over.
Yeah.
But we got over it because we managed to get those relationships going with some other people. We created more influence around us, no matter what the organizational, chart was. We managed to get allies everywhere else. And that really is important because you need to be able to have people to decompress with and you can be honest with. Because that's how you get through things where your job is a little bit ambiguous, a little bit, prone to be misinterpreted. And you're everywhere, to be honest, in this industry.
Yeah, and I think that's the key, right? Like you need to find people and sometimes you might not be able to, really decompress with your manager, and also there's like all these political things. So having the people around you helps you to understand as well, like is this happening? Is this okay that is happening? Like, am I being, to use the term, gaslit, right? Or is it like, or maybe this is how it works? And I think for me, I always like to rely on, finding people around me in all the teams, right? I'm not just saying designers. So I'll try to have the designer friends, and maybe you have your tech friends too, because you need to get their help with like tech stuff, and just in general, that's just how you can build your influence. But that also helps with your resilience, right? Because you're not depending on just these rigid structures that we're saying, right? And I think in retrospect, we are a bit biased to our last work experience because everything was shifting a lot. I think things maybe are a bit more stable in other companies, but still, I think, having that network of people will definitely help you in many ways. And yeah, you don't need to only rely on your manager, or your colleagues, right? You can just make friends in different places.
Yeah, I think you're right. Look, what we're trying to say, I think, with this podcast is that nobody's going to stop the changes that are happening right now in the industry, because that change is coming in many shapes and forms and sizes. The reorgs, the shifting briefs, the job descriptions, that means something different every quarter. And believe me, the AI is rewriting them for sure. What we've both learned is that people who can handle it aren't the ones who perform the hardest. They're the ones who found the rhythm. And the rhythm comes from letting the right people in, having the courage not to be perfect, and are being allowed to be okay with it. And that's important. Resilience is something we can build in and around us, and we need to want to build it as individual contributors and as leaders. But how? Everybody might ask, and I don't think we, answered in this episode, because we don't have all the answers. Neither do the people we're going to bring on this podcast, but we do know this. The more honestly we talk about this stuff, the less alone it feels. The next time we're going further. We're bringing in people who've built something real, failed at something real, and learn something worth saying out loud. The question we'll be asking, and we'd love to know your answer too, is what does it actually look like when a team gets this right? Send us a voice note, prove us wrong, show us what good looks like. We'll be listening.
And this was our first episode of Ship Now and Cry Later. We won't be crying later, I hope. That we can finish now and smile later for this first episode.